in July, but I started at London Wildlife Trust in July, but as a member for, well, a very long time, shall we say. I'm aware of Hutchinson Bank's fame, and at 14 acres, I can say that Hutchinson's Bank Nature Reserve is one of the larger areas of chalkgrass and remaining in Greater London. It's for those, especially from joining from America, it's situated on the edge of New Addington in Croydon in South London. It's been managed as a nature reserve by London Wildlife Trust on behalf of Croydon Council for over 35 years. So it's still not as long as I've been a member, I hasten to add. The reserve is one of 4 almost contiguous sites under the Trust's management in the dry chalk valley along Featherbed Lane, northwest Forestdale in Croydon. The other 3 are Chapel Bank, just in Surrey, Threecorner Grove and Featherbed Lane Verge. And just sort of for the on the technical side, the latter 2 and Hutchinson Bank constitute a local nature reserve, while Hutchinson Bank, Chapel Bank and Threecorner Grove form a site of metropolitan importance for nature conservation. Now I've got to try, and this is the usual thing. Sorry about this. I've just got to move the one of the screens so I can see what's going on. Right. But obviously for this audience, it's justly famous for the diversity of butterflies recorded here over the last 40 years, particularly grizzled and dingy skippers, green and brown hair streaks, and dark green fritillary, in addition to the small blue, for which it is obviously very famous. And so this makes it one of, if not the most important sites in London for butterflies. And so it's described as the 4th best in Britain. I'll just give a quick aside on the small blue, which is not fully understood, but one of my favourite butterflies, and one I know a little bit more about than the rest, because I'm not a butterfly expert like many of you here. I have managed sites for small blue in Sutton, including several where they have made something of a leap across suburbia, obviously not reading the textbooks about not flying very far. But with the advice of butterfly conservation, at that time it was Gail Jeffcoat and others, I created kidney vetch scrapes at other sites to create a soft landing for further leaps, but more on that here later about doing scrapes. So first, a bit of history of the site and its surrounds, starting with a rural picture of New Addington in 1937. Hutchinson's was part of this open agricultural landscape and grazed by sheep until the 1940s. After the war, the New Addington estate began to take shape, and in this and other aerial photographs of 1945, the site was open grassland with small scattered areas of young scrub and some more mature scrub developing in the north. However, by 1980, Hutchinson Bank was 75% maturing scrub and woodland, after myxomatosis decimated the rabbit population in the 1950s, which had been the main grazing vector at the time. In 1986, Croydon Council, the landowner, invited the trust to manage the site, following concerns raised by local residents that it was neglected and subject to high levels of fly tipping. The trust's early work focused on removing some of this debris, like cars, motorbikes, etc., and retaining the remaining patches of open chalk grassland, many of which have become glades effectively, surrounded by mature hawthorn and blackthorn and dogwood scrub. More drastic measures were suggested to properly tackle the scrub, such as bulldozing it off to encourage the colonisation of appropriate grasses and herbaceous plants, more typical of the chalk grassland. However, the costs and perceived reaction to such interventions led to a slower but more gradual but continual process of scrub clearance through cutting followed by grazing. And that's just showing the effect after the spraying of the dogwood. So grazing with sheep was first introduced to Hutchinson Bank in '91 as a pilot with the then Downlands Countryside Management Project, who I just started working with in Sutton around that time. It was formally supported from 1993 by a 10-year countryside stewardship scheme. This enabled the establishment of the infrastructure of the first array of grazing paddocks, which largely remain there today with the numbering system some of you may know. It is a public open space with a bridle path through it, which therefore this obviously requires a balance of reasonable access, but also the means to manage livestock and deliver conservation objectives. Goats and ponies have also been employed to browse the coarser material and woody growth on the site. They're particularly effective. Goats are particularly effective at that. However, not all of the dip fields can be grazed due to concerns about soil contamination and the potential effects on the livestock, such as slimmings down. And this has scrubbed up a lot since that picture was taken in 2011. I was there last Monday, a week ago, and it certainly, some of it is about 15-foot scrub now. Corporate volunteers here and elsewhere continue to contribute to the management of these and other LWT sites. I think this may have been one of the first examples of them working on a London Wildlife Trust site. And around that sort of time, the first scrapes were created on site. These were stripped down to the bare chalk and were seeded with an appropriate wildflower mix. And you'll see some of the most spectacular results in later pictures. And I think one of the earlier pictures was that as well. And this is perhaps one of the most frequently used images of the site. But this sort of photography is useful to record the change over time from the early days when it was mostly scrub and just pockets of chalk grass, and to the more open mosaic you see nowadays. Some of the additions that we've had, such as great earlier rattle, this is a Schedule 8 species, and as such this brings a further complexity to the management of the site, with further restrictions on cutting or grazing times that this provides. And of course, this is perhaps the most familiar entrance, a short walk from trams and buses, but perhaps not the most salubrious entrance, with a civic amenity site next door. So, although London Wildlife Trust's responsibility formally starts at the end of this path, it makes sense to keep it as welcoming as possible. I'll be talking more about that aspect later. So, as mentioned, the main habitat management is really to maintain grazing with Herdwick sheep on a rotational basis across 6 paddocks. The long-term aim is to trial cattle. Some of the issues are about the steepness of some of the slopes, which isn't that good for cattle. But of course, the main thing will be to ensure we protect sensitive species such as orchids, small blue, brown hairstreak, in tandem with a continued push to prevent scrub encroachment. It should be remembered that this site was originally sheep grazed up until the 1940s, and that's what and that is typical of a lot of chalk grassland in the area. We'd dearly love more resources for the site, but we are lucky to have a lot of fantastic volunteers, some of whom I expect are on this call, who undertake the bulk of the non-grazing work. We do have skilled contractors, many of whom have worked on the site for many years, and the expertise and goodwill of the Downlands Partnership, and of course their livestock, which also do a lot of work here. And of course we do have the constructive scrutiny of butterfly conservation and local observers. Now, I'm going to be talking about the Brilliant Butterflies project, but it's a risky statement for this audience. But Hutchinson's Bank isn't a butterfly garden, and London Wildlife Trust aren't going to manage it as such. And indeed, the introduction of a few species in recent years is worrying, as they're unlikely to be a testimony or a result of our management. Nonetheless, we're acutely aware of Hutchinson's Bank's importance for a number of species, and our management does take account of this. Brilliant Butterflies was a project that ran from 2019 to 2022, involving the Trust, Butterfly Conservation, and the Natural History Museum, and it's funded by the People's Postcode Lottery. The Natural History Museum's involvement was partly to do environmental DNA surveys, and these indeed may reveal more butterfly records, perhaps, with a bit of luck. And we will continue to work with partners such as Butterfly Conservation to manage this suite of nature reserves holistically as part of a nature recovery network that can provide the conditions for natural dispersal and colonisation. So on these local sites, restoring the chalk grassland habitat remains key. So we do have a holistic perspective of our management of our sites in this area, but largely our focus has been on Hutchinson's Bank and to a lesser extent Chapel Bank. But a brilliant butterflies project went beyond this, working with neighbours and on surrounding land, and indeed built a butterfly bank in my local park in West Wickham. They also tried novel approaches to engage local interest. They also enable better waymarking and signage. And indeed, the manufacturer of the steel monoliths was so taken with the site and quite proud of their work that they wrote it up as a case study. And you can share that. I can share that amongst folk who want to see that. But it's interesting. It's on their website. It's a landmark. So, indeed, are we going to a better place with Hutchinson's Bank? I'd like to think so. Not just a drinking control area, as shown here. We've done a lot of restoration over the last 35 years, and we're in the first stages to providing future access for us to graze cattle. And a lot of this work has been completed, the first stages. The eDNA monitoring by the Natural History Museum will continue. And apart from routine management, our priority is to secure a new 25-year lease, which will give us a better ability to attract the resources to manage Hutchinson's Bank as a high-quality, species-rich chalk grassland for all to enjoy. As part of this continued approach, Hutchinson's Bank received a Green Flag Award this year, and that's, as well as the management of the habitat, I think this is it rewards the focus on the access and signage and making the site a more welcoming place. So I was aiming to finish the presentation here because I thought probably what most people want to ask is further questions, and there are colleagues from London Wildlife Trust and the Downlands Partnership who may be able to help if there's a question that goes beyond my knowledge of the site. But anyway, so presumably, do I now stop sharing, Richard? Simon, sorry. I can't see Simon on my screen at the moment.